Last year in 2008 we had over 16,000 MUIs reported, and the breakdown that you can see in the pie chart there on the first slide related to MUIs by type kind of shows the percentage of those MUIs and what we saw. It's, I think, pretty noteworthy to take a look at peer-to-peer acts. 10% of those 16,000 MUIs involved peer-to-peer situations where individuals had been involved in either an assault of each other or sexual abuse of some kind or theft. That's a pretty significant number. Also, you can see unapproved behavior interventions at about 11%. And that is a pattern or a trend that we're seeing throughout the state, that we still have quite a few situations where the primary role of those is where people are putting their hands on folks, and it's either not in a plan or they've gone further than what the plan would necessarily allow. Something that's significant, and obviously you can see the biggest piece of the pie there, is unscheduled hospital admissions. 24% of the MUIs reported in 2008 were unscheduled hospital admissions. That is down, I think, a little bit from last year, which is good news. Again, and just to kind of round out the remaining ones, alleged neglect and misappropriation, right around 7 and 8%, as well as injury, and then followed by, of course, death at 5%, which has maintained pretty consistent over the course of the last quarter or last 3 years, and then verbal abuse and medical emergencies. So that's just some general information in terms of overall MUIs over the course of 2008. All right, let's talk about some of the neglect situations that I think are critical. The ones that probably are first and foremost to all of you is the supervision neglect that we talked about. A lot of the individuals that we're providing services to that have sexual offender or those type behaviors require certain kinds of supervision. And I think we've done a better job in the state of identifying that supervision, but let me just give you an example. And those of you sit around and think about it at your sites to determine this. If I said that Lee was 24/7 supervision because he may have some potentially offending behaviors, I would bet if we went around the table at all the sites out there, we might get some different opinions of what 24/7 supervision is. Does that mean that I have to be within arm's length of Lee? Does that mean I have to be able to see Susan across the room? Does that mean I have to be able to hear Heidi in the other room? Because then I am providing 24/7 supervision. And what we've seen in terms of investigations as they relate to neglect in our population is sometimes that's not well defined. In a lot of situations that hasn't been well defined. And that comes to a training piece, that comes to making sure that people have had time to get to know people and develop that rapport and come up with those supervision plans that make sense. Now, obviously, we don't want to have a regimen for everybody's daily routine. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that if somebody has the potential to offend, we've got to understand that as a service provider. We've got to make sure we provide the supports and systems in place to help to keep that from happening. So that's something that is important, and I think as a field we need to make sure that we do a good job of. Other situations that I think we've seen in terms of trends as it relates to physical abuse, and I think we've talked about this probably in the past, but we still have those situations with power struggles and control. I think about 75% of our physical abuse allegations where one of the individuals we serve has assaulted a support staff person or a family member or something else involves control. And this really isn't a joke, but if we had a situation where we could control cigarettes a little bit better, I think we would solve a whole lot of our problems. It's amazing the number of cases that come to our attention that started because someone had a cigarette schedule or someone was out of cigarettes or something like that, and it developed from just that little problem, an issue, to a full-blown assault, a full-blown power struggle that ended up potentially in a restraint or in a timeout or something that probably we never had to get there if we'd done a good job up front. So there's clearly still some work we need to do in terms of training as it relates to control and rights issues and those kinds of things that I think will be very helpful as we continue to look at reducing those kinds of supervision neglect situations. Sexual abuse, I do want to talk a little bit about that because obviously those are probably some of the most serious MUIs that we get. If you look down there at the bottom corner, we're talking about sexual contact as well as sexual conduct. And a fortunate thing is that in our peer-to-peer situation, sexual contact, which is the touching piece, happens in about 84% of the cases. So conduct is only about 16%. So that's good, and that's actually improved over the last couple of years. So I mean that is a good thing. However, that's still 16% we wish would never happen, and hope that we can avoid or put preventions in place to keep those kinds of things from happening. I do have some examples that I kind of wanted to go through that I think will help you see some of the things that we've seen in terms of offending individuals and the MUIs that we're seeing. Primarily, they're in the abuse category: physical abuse, sexual assaults, and again, a growing majority of those are peer-to-peer. And again, that's a struggle for us, but something that I think we got to take very serious, and teams have to take a look at, because it's not going away, and it's something that is actually probably, if you take a look at the MUIs that are picking up steam, peer-to-peer is still one of those that is. And I think we do a great job of reporting peer-to-peer cases. I think we do a very good job of investigating those cases. Where I think we failed still as a system and we need to improve a little more is in terms of prevention planning. Because the whole point of an incident reporting process is to have the good investigation, but to then take that information and put it into practice with the individual, the teams, and the folks that support individuals to try to keep that from happening again. And we still see prevention plans that sound pretty good on paper, but where the rubber meets the road, we haven't done a lot of changes. And we still see some prevention plans that will say, this is part of what Lee does. We'll continue to monitor that and try to support that, but we don't always make efforts at good, positive, proactive change to try to keep those kinds of incidents from occurring or continuing to happen. Theft situations as well. Let's talk just briefly about a couple examples that we see at the department, and I'm sure probably are familiar to you because it's not something that is happening in a vacuum. It's happening all over the state. We had a situation that was reported to us where an individual went to the YMCA with a caregiver. They were swimming in the pool, having a good time. It was going well. The caregiver struck up a conversation with the lifeguard that was there at the pool at the Y. The individual went to the restroom, and unfortunately a little child was in the restroom. The caregiver didn't follow him into the restroom, and a very unfortunate incident occurred in the restroom for that individual. Again, it kind of goes back to what I talked about leading up to this. I mean, that was a preventable incident, clearly a preventable incident. The supervision level had been clearly identified, but it was a situation where the individual support staff didn't follow up. When interviewed, this support staff person had said, this guy has been doing good over the last year. We've had no issues like that. He's had opportunities like that. And I think it's probably something that we hear a little too much, where people became confident, people became comfortable. You still have a person that's displayed these pretty high-risk offenses, and something that we need to make sure that we keep an eye on and have a system in place to protect. Another example that I've got, an individual went upstairs alone with a roommate. The employee went to take a cigarette break outside of the home. The ISP identified a one-to-one within arm's length because of the background and history and the behavior that this person displayed. Unfortunately, the person went upstairs into the room. A roommate was there. This was a sexual assault as well that occurred because a person had gone out then and taken a smoke break and allowed the opportunity for this incident to take place. Again, it's a situation of, in this case, things were pretty clearly identified, and it was a lapse in providing that supervision that caused the ability for this incident to occur. So, again, going back to what we kind of talked about earlier, the training, the support, the oversight, the follow-up. Again, when this individual staff person was interviewed as a part of this case, his response was he couldn't believe this happened, this guy. And I think this was for almost 2 years. This guy had not had an incident of any kind.